Here we go. Beautiful humans, welcome to Radical Talks and thank you for joining us today. My name is Emma. I'm the co-founder of Be Radical and your host. This week serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of diversity, equity and inclusion in our workplaces and communities. It's a time to reflect on our shared commitment to creating environments where every individual can thrive and contribute their unique talents. Today, we've assembled a kick-ass panel of experts and individuals who have experiences to shed light on the pressing issue of disability inclusion in the workplace. While we celebrate the huge progress that's being made in the realm of disability and inclusion, we recognise that there's lots of work still to be done to ensure that disabled employees are fully supported, empowered and valued in their professional journeys. Our panel today brings together a wealth of knowledge, personal stories and expertise to explore the challenges and the opportunities surrounding disability disclosure, reasonable adjustments and the broader landscape of disability inclusion. We'll delve into the experiences of our panelists, the implications of recent research findings and the strategies and solutions that can guide us to a more inclusive world. As we engage in this dialogue, let's remember that fostering an inclusive environment is not just a task for a week. It's a continuous effort that requires commitment, understanding, and most importantly, action. Our aim today is not only to raise awareness, but also to inspire meaningful change in how we approach disability inclusion in our workplaces, with the view to making them more welcoming, accessible, and supportive for everyone. On to introductions. I'd love to hear from all of our panel. Kath, can I start with you, please?
You can. Sorry, I couldn't come off mute then. Hi, welcome. Nice to meet you all. Yeah, I know, straight away. I'm Kath, former HR director for Lacoste, and I've worked for lots of other brands as well. I've worked for VF, for North Face, and Vans, and Timberland. I'm also for PVH, which is Tommy and Calvin, and various senior roles. And now I own my own business called Notoro HR, which aims to look at more smaller businesses and solve all of their HR issues alongside recruitment. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me, Em.
Welcome, and thank you very much for your time, and also congratulations on the new business venture. Really awesome. Jazz, over to you, mate.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jazz. I'm Director of Partnership here at Radical called Be Radical. I'm over 50, proud East Londoner. I'm a former banker for my sins and also a prison leaver. And I have a hidden disability, which is tucked away in my left ear due to a vestibular schwannoma that's growing in my brain.
Thank you very much, Jazz. Welcome. Now, Eve, you were a little bit nervous earlier, but actually, I think you're the most important panelist. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how we know you?
Yes, of course. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Eve. I recently joined Cushman & Wakefield Help Desk. It's my 3rd month. I have a condition called 18q-. It's a genetic condition, but it doesn't really affect me that much. I just get on with life, really. And yeah, thank you for having me, Emma.
Beautiful, Eve. And you're also a ambassador, or you've done some panel discussions previously, and you do a bit of volunteer work. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so with my charity, 18 Chromosome and Registry Research Society, I've done a podcast for them, just talking about the difficulties I've faced day to day. Yeah, I've done a bake sale for them, raised a lot of money for that. I also done a skydive as well.
Oh my gosh.
Raised £500.
I literally can't think of doing anything worse, Eve. You're so impressive. Jim, can I throw to you, mate?
You can. I'm Jim Benstead. I've been involved in assistive technology in a very wide range of roles now for a little over 20 years. Most recently, I've been specialising in visual impairment, working with a lot of people who are in work who have received support, if we can call it that, from Access to Work, the UK government service, and then trying to help their employers actually implement the adjustments that the employees need to do their job. So yeah, looking forward to talking more about that this afternoon.
There I was thinking you were like not a day over 25, Jim, and you've been working for 20 odd years in the space. Wow. Maddie, last but not least.
Hi, thanks, Em. Yeah, my name's Maddie. I have recently launched a company called Simplicity Works, working with DEI training and consulting. I am mentally disabled myself, and I'm also neurodivergent. I have quite an array of comorbidities, which is unfortunately pretty normal for people that are neurodivergent. And one of the biggest things I'm passionate about is trying to change the narrative around what disabilities look like, what support looks like, and also trying to shed some light on the stigmas around intersectionality and how people can mask or not mask in the world. I'm very privileged that I can cover up most of my disabilities in a working environment, but not everybody has that fortune. And actually, it can really heavily dictate what their career is going to look like.
Which is the perfect segue into my first question, Maddie. Thank you very much. So a report by the Equality and Human Rights Commission found that 58% of disabled employees in the UK are concerned about disclosing their disability, believing that it would negatively impact their career opportunities. And then research conducted by the Disability Rights Commission has highlighted that people with disabilities often encounter stereotypes and stigma in the workplace, which can create barriers to disclosure, really. I'd love to hear from the panelists in the room that have disabilities. What are your experiences in terms of disclosing, and what have you learned? Eve, can I throw to you first, mate?
Yeah, of course. So obviously I don't mind disclosing my condition, as it's very rare, and not many people have heard about it before. So I enjoy telling people about it and what I can, what I can't do, just because they've never heard of it, and I just want to spread the word out there. And yeah, so some people assume, like in my previous role, that I'm stupid or I'm lazy, but I'm not. It just takes me a bit longer to do certain tasks. But if someone explains to that person that I do have a condition and that it does take me longer to do certain things, then maybe it would have been better. But I just love telling people about my condition and talking about it, going to charity events. I did this one in London, and I spoke to over 200 people about it. So yeah, and I really
you're like an exception to the rule, Eve.
Yeah,
you don't mind talking about it. I think it must be really challenging talking about your disability so openly, and then being met with really judgmental views or perceptions that are
absolutely,
that's tough.
Like during mainstream school as well, I had the learning support unit with me. I got bullied as well through my whole life, basically. So but that's normal.
That's awful. Eve, can I just ask you to maybe maneuver your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth?
Oh yeah, sorry.
That's better, because I was struggling to hear you, mate. I wasn't sure whether I was getting old and losing my hearing, which is kind of apt, or that was a tech issue. Thank you very much. Jazz, talk to me about sort of when you've disclosed, what's the response been?
Well, I'll be honest, it's quite complex for me, and it was very much a personal decision. So I never disclosed my disability until working with you guys. because I already felt that I already had enough barriers getting to work, being a person of colour, being from the East End, low social value, that kind of stuff. I already had a lot of barriers I had to overcome. I didn't need to layer another one. So my own bias was I felt that actually it would affect my employability. So I didn't disclose it, so I will navigate it around it. But as I've got older and my conditions progressed, it's got to a stage where I've acknowledged actually I can have the confidence and courage to ask for reasonable adjustments. So actually there is, there's a variation in me. It's not a disadvantage. It's a variation in me as a human that I need some alternative support to get the best out of me so I can give the best to yourselves or any employer. But yeah, it was very much a conversation of courage that I had to find. So I didn't mask it, I hid it. I buried my disability for most of my life.
And in terms of your previous employers and your experience at our place, what's the difference, do you think? Like, what made you feel safe enough to disclose?
Well, it's the environment. Most of my career was in wealth management and the financial services district, in big cities like London, New York, Singapore, and they were very much alpha male jungles, as I call them now. They were managed by people that, if you showed any form of weakness in their eyes, they would actually say, well, you're not good enough for the job. Because a lot of it was back in the old days, picking up the phone. So if your phone was your weapon, it was also what they perceived to be your weakness. You're already on and I always had to overwork. So I was always in the outside lane. I just wanted to stay on track, if that made sense. And I didn't have the confidence or courage to actually say to them, look, this is what's really going on. But here at Radical, it's completely different. You've been put on the inside lane, questions you get asked are open. How can we support you to get the best out of you? We've had those conversations throughout my time here. And I think employers are beginning to have that sort of inner conversation, that deep dive organizationally wise on what they need to do next to get the best out of their employees, because we're acknowledging quite lately, but we're acknowledging that actually we come in different shapes, sizes and forms and variations.
Yeah, certainly. I think one of my observations is that disability is often viewed through a deficits lens, and Eve touched on it earlier. She said that people thought, she was dumb, or she was, I can't remember what other sort of descriptor you used, Eve, but pretty awful sort of perceptions about disability. Maddie, can you tell me about your experience, please?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I suppose kind of helpfully I fall in the middle of Eve and Jazz in terms of disclosing. When I was younger and when I first got diagnosed with bipolar, I would never disclose, not in a million years, especially because I was consistently surrounded by the narrative. When somebody was ever being horrible or being aggressive, somebody would say, oh, I reckon they're bipolar. And I think to myself, okay, well, I'm not saying anything. And there's so many things, so much stigma around the diagnosis. But also there's sort of the opposite side. I got told by somebody who's not a mental health professional when I first got diagnosed. They said, oh, well, bipolar's all right. That's what clever people get. And I thought, that's an interesting take. Because of the whole sort of Stephen Fry's got bipolar, and you think, oh, well, he's this really famous face and he talks about it a lot, which is done. It's good to raise awareness, but there's also this bizarre narrative that's developed that if you're bipolar, you're incredibly productive and intelligent, or you're way too much to handle, you're incredibly volatile and you're going to be really aggressive. And actually, neither of them are true. It's far more complex than that. And actually, I have found that when I don't disclose and when I haven't disclosed, people treat me really well. I have this huge privilege. I'm white, I'm well educated, I sound pretty sort of, not many people can place me unless I'm really relaxing and my Essex comes out. And so I tend to, lots of people give me lots of opportunities. And then I found that the way that people spoke to me and treated me changed the moment that I couldn't hide a disability anymore. And the moment that I sort of either came clean, admitted, spoke about it, or I started to develop symptoms and I needed support, or I needed to take a bit of time off, the change was absolutely drastic. And then combined with that, I'm also a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, and that again, so much stigma. Definitely was never talking about that. And as soon as you disclose it, especially because I recovered so young, there was this huge, there used to be arguments, conversations about, well, you can't actually be bipolar, you can't actually be a recovering drug addict, I don't believe you, or if they did believe you, you get treated differently. And it's just a whole spectrum of responses. It's quite complicated to navigate. It's a lot of them, it's sort of mental taxation.
Yeah, I was going to say it must be exhausting. And also, you know, my feeling is that you just must live in fear constantly, you know, of judgment, of reprimand, of, you know, all of these sort of consequences, owing to the fact that, you know, employers and the general public just don't understand disability and don't, you know, meet people who are disabled with, you know, empathy, right, and congruence and unconditional regard. Outrageous. Kath, can I just throw to you as well, mate, please? Your experience
as an employer is probably
either one.
or my experience. I mean, either one. Okay, so I'm a dyslexic HR director, which when you have to write letters that are legally looking after the business can be something which you don't necessarily want to always explain. But you find, I'm sure with everybody on the panel and everybody who has a disability, that you're probably one of the best problem solvers there is in the land, because you've hidden stuff for so long, or you've worked around things for so long. And you know you're bright enough to do whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing, but it might not just be, like for me, I can read a PDF incredibly well. If you send me something in a Word document, it doesn't work for me, so I change it to PDFs, and I do a little bit more work myself around those areas. It doesn't take me long at all. I'm a whiz at doing it. But there's certain things that I think, in terms of, I wouldn't ask someone for that reasonable adjustment, and if I told them, then I'd probably be concerned about how they'd judge me on it. From an employer's point of view, it's probably something, questions for later on, in terms of how employers really manage well, not reasonable adjustments, but disabilities on a whole. But it's not there's still a huge fear from an employer's point of view, as well as the person who's disclosing. There's no sort of comfort zone yet of people being like, great, we know how to deal with this, and great, I'm happy to disclose. We're still not quite there yet, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And so in the context of like starting a new job, that must be like extra daunting for folks with a disability. Eve, tell me about sort of your experiences starting in, say, Cushman & Wakefield, your current employer, compared to your last one, maybe, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I previously worked with a company that didn't really understand my condition, and as I said before in the first question, that they thought I was being lazy or stupid, or not doing that well. And some of my colleagues didn't really understand that it takes me a bit longer to do certain tasks, and they didn't really provide me with that much support. With Cushman & Wakefield, they have just been so amazing and so nice and kind, and putting up with me, to be honest, because I've been asking lots of questions, and if I get stuck on something, then I feel like I can ask them the question. Also in my previous role, I feel like they excluded me a lot from like social gatherings or any events that came up, and but with Cushman it's so much more different. I've got the opportunities to speak on this panel, which I think is incredible. So yeah, everyone's just so lovely and supportive now.
And on the flip side, I think they've got a really, really great recruit in you. So there's this like mutual exchange that happens when people like you are welcomed into processes and supported really well. Maddie, what can recruiters and employers do to make people with disabilities feel like they're psychologically, safe to disclose and have conversations about what they need? Give me some like handy takeaways for our audience.
So I think you have to start from the very beginning. I think often people start that process of supporting somebody right at the very end when they're actually in the room with them. And by that point, it's kind of too late. If you have to have this consistent narrative, because people with disabilities have been burned so frequently by being unsupported or directly mistreated, they're going to need some reassurance that actually this is a safe environment. And it's things like when that first ad goes out for the post that you're recruiting for, it has to mention inclusivity. It has to be written in an inclusive way. You can have some information at the bottom that you're happy to accommodate people. But also, and actually this is something that you posted up on LinkedIn, I think it was yesterday, is this notion that saying to a disabled person or somebody that you don't know is disabled yet, when they're applying, please tell us your disability, is a really challenging and very heavy question, because actually what you're doing is you're asking them to disclose something that's very frightening, and you're also not actually giving them any sign that you're going to support them, because you're not asking the right question. The right question is definitely, what do you need for this interview? What accommodations do you need for this interview? And it's a completely different reframe, because what you're immediately doing is saying, I want to find out how to help you, not I want to find out what's wrong with you. And it's a very different approach, and it's definitely appreciated. All these little bits about language, they really absolutely matter.
Yeah, we do a bit of consultancy to support our clients to look at their the candidate journey and experience through lots of different lenses, but predominantly disability. And often we say, just use really simple language and state your intention. So if your intention is to increase the representation of people with disabilities in your workplace, say that. Because when a disabled person reads that, they immediately feel reassured that their application will be taken seriously. And then what happens is you create an environment where you can have these conversations without creating like this fear of judgment, and the information you uncover then can be used to accommodate that person in whatever the process is. So whether it's, an application form, it could be an interview, it could be onboarding. So statistics from the Great Big Workplace Adjustment Survey, which was conducted in 2023, highlighted the challenges many disabled employees face in terms of obtaining the necessary workplace adjustments quickly. More specifically, they found that 1 in 8 disabled employees reported waiting over a year for their reasonable adjustments, which really underscores the issues of delays in implementing accommodations. The survey also uncovered the fact that only 10% found it easy to get the adjustments they needed, emphasising the need for improvement in the process of requesting and receiving accommodations in the workplace. These statistics shed light on the urgency of addressing the problem, really. Jim, I want to understand from your perspective, you've 20 odd years in doing this work, what are the challenges and what is the impact on both businesses and disabled folk when this work isn't done well and right?
Yeah, the impact is profound to both employees and an employer. At its worst limits, the impacts can be profound on the employer in terms of impacting their working culture. It can be impacting their bottom line, and even better, they might not even be aware that it's happening, and it can really start a rot in organisations that is draining resources and finances. So the first thing to mention here, I think, is my day-to-day work is about supporting employees to get the reasonable adjustments they need in their job. but I do look at it in a more general sense, and I'm interested in how all sorts of different people are kind of impacted by that, and that includes the employer. So there is a direct impact there beyond what's happening with the employee. But yeah, I mean, this is a big question, and I think it really helps to kind of break it down. And if we're looking at why it takes so long for someone to have reasonable adjustments properly implemented, I guess the first question is, what's a reasonable adjustment? I think we're going to have an opportunity to look at that in more detail later on. So forget the word reasonable for a moment. What's an adjustment? Well, an adjustment, very broadly speaking, is something that if somebody has a disability, it's a bit of training, coaching, a specific tool, software, or a tweak to how they are doing their job. So it is something they are using that's probably specifically relates to their disability that helps them to do their job. The way that I find it easiest to think about this is that it's about giving people the tools that they need to do their job. What that means, if we're talking about not implementing these things, we're not talking about optional extras here. We're not talking about wonderful kind of productivity tools that if I went and worked in 9 to 5 somewhere, I might not have access to all the stuff that I use in my own business. I might feel it impacted my productivity. We're not talking about things like that. We are talking about the core tools that people need in order to turn up to work every day and get their job done. So if we're not implementing those, I will speak here in the context of visual impairment, because that's what I've got most recent kind of experience in. One of those adjustments might be a piece of software called a screen magnifier that will make stuff bigger on the screen if you have a visual impairment. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's the basic idea. Now, if you're not providing someone who needs that bit of software with that bit of software, and if it's not working properly, it's a little bit like if I were to have my keyboard taken away, or I didn't have my monitor, or I didn't have my webcam here, so you weren't able to kind of see and hear me here. So that's really the way to kind of conceptualize this, that these are just fundamental tools. They are special in relation to the kind of core of people, the majority of people. But in terms of their day-to-day use, they're about as special as a keyboard, a mouse, or a monitor. The other thing, just to pick out from that question, the thing about 1 in 8 people waiting over a year to have reasonable adjustments implemented, I think that might be misleading. A delay, because it sounds like, okay, well, 1 in 8 over a year, it's not great, but it doesn't sound awful. But here we're really thinking a delay of a month is a month where someone hasn't got what they need to do their job. And that causes quite obvious problems that ripple through an organization. So scaling that up to a year, we can see we've got potentially a year there where someone's salary is being paid to them. They're experiencing all of the frustration of not being able to do their job. The clients of the organization don't know this is going on. They just know they're not potentially getting the service that they want to get. The employer doesn't know what to do. So it can be quite it can be a much more severe thing than the 1 in 8 statistic maybe suggests. I should say as well that the story that I'm going to tell here, it might sound to people that haven't gone through this process because they've not needed reasonable adjustments in the past and they've never had to implement them for anyone else, that I'm kind of overstressing this to make a point. To be absolutely clear on that, this is the story I'm telling is possibly slightly more extreme than most. In the world of visual impairment, I really don't think it is. And there are many more extreme stories that I could tell. It's funny, looking through the chat, I think a former client of mine is in the chat at the moment, and she can vouch for some of these things that I'm going to be talking about today, I think. So I just as a side point, I have one client at the moment, if we're talking about 1 in 8 or 3, I have one client at the moment who in the last 18 months, she works for a large UK employer, 40,000 people. We've all used their services probably. In the last 18 years, sorry, she's worked for 6 months She's been off work full pay for the rest of that time. That is an extreme example, but the other things that I'm going to kind of talk about today are much more kind of in the middle of it. I think as well, again, it makes sense to talk about both the employer and the disabled employee in this context and how they are both impacted. Now, again, my day-to-day work, I'm primarily looking out for the interests of the employee because that's what my job is. However, things can get oppositional in a very kind of unhelpful way where the employee can be on one side of the aisle demanding stuff. That often kind of doesn't help. In general, what I find, things can be a lot more interconnected. One way to think of this, if you're an employer and you're looking to support an employee who has a disability, where is the support for everyone that you're asking to support that person? Have they been given the resource that they need? If they're a line manager for this person, they say, okay, you need to go and put the reasonable adjustments in place. What have they been given to help them to do that? Most of the time, for this pretty technical work, the answer's nothing. So yeah, the business issues first, it can cause really kind of broad problems which often get hidden away in the organization. You have productivity issues, you have just resource issues where if you've got someone that hasn't worked in 18 years and you're contracted to pay their salary, that money is kind of going out of the door every month, you're getting nothing for it. Potentially, again, your clients, even if they're very aware of disability issues, if they're dealing with somebody on the phone, may not be aware that the fact that they're getting a service that they're not getting what they need in terms of a service, that's at the root of it. The problem you can get from there is that if that isn't solved, the level of trust in the organization can drop and the level of blame can go through the roof. I'm going to talk about that in a second with a case study. For the employee, the issues, I mean, you might have someone that just isn't able to do their job anymore, so they leave their job. You might have someone who is contracted but is experiencing extreme stress because the solutions, and the point that I think Maddie made earlier on, that people with disabilities have been burnt many times before. The level of trust that many of my clients have in their employers is minimal. And that's completely fair because they have been treated in a way where that is an accurate level of trust to have. But what can then happen is the employee is tied into a situation where they have to keep moving forward with the process. The employer can suggest all these solutions which they might have pulled out of a hat, to be honest. And when those solutions are presented to the employee and it doesn't work, it can be borderline gaslighting, to be honest, because the employer will be sitting there saying, well, we've done this for potentially 18 years and it hasn't worked. So why am I being forced to believe this is going to work again? Profound impacts on kind of mental health and general well-being for my clients, which I won't kind of go into in too much detail there, but that's a summary of it. Now, in terms of what can be done, very briefly, I'll give you the outline of a case study of a client that I've been working with for the last couple of years. Again, this may sound like I'm overdoing the story, that I'm trying to kind of make a point here, but while this client has experienced a lot of issues all at the same time, probably more than most, all of these issues I see happening in multiple places. And this is part of the problem. The issue is both broad in that there's lots of things to go wrong. And if one of them goes wrong, it's a single point of failure, your employee isn't supported. It's also deep in that you can have one employee where there are multiple barriers. The employer is trying to find a solution for them, but they might coincidentally remove one of the barriers because they don't have a kind of empirical understanding of what the problem actually is. They might remove one of the barriers. The overall barrier is still there. So they say, oh, well, that didn't work, and you put the barrier back. So this is the sort of space we've got. It's a broad and a deep problem. Now, I have done a lot of work over the last few years trying to solve this. That work has changed me as a person. The ideas that I had going into it, I no longer hold. And I've had to drop a lot of preconceptions I had about this and appreciate a lot of things that were very counterintuitive. One of the big inspirations for me on this work was a guy called Martin Bromley. I'm going to put a link in the chat now so you can come look him up. Martin's wife, I think in 2005, died while undergoing a routine operation at an NHS hospital. The NHS launched an investigation, and Martin was included in that, and he kind of observed it kind of ticking along. When it got to the end of that and the report was issued, Martin's background, he was an airline pilot. And in airlines, when something goes wrong there, obviously, it can be absolutely catastrophic. The culture of dealing with those sorts of issues in the airline industry emphasizes eliminating blame at all parts of the process. Mm. Martin looked at the process the NHS had gone through, which is the standard medical process, and was shocked at how the aim of that was to say, this person got this wrong. Mm. So what he's done since then is gone out and lectured the NHS and various other organisations about how you can eliminate blame and how that can improve the problem solving. That's really the core of this, I think. The problem you have in these organisations, that is the approach that if things aren't working here, the employee will need to raise a grievance. Grievance processes in general are about saying, often, one person is responsible for this thing going wrong. Mm. And it just doesn't work. I had interesting conversation with a client recently, again, working for a very large employer you would have heard of. And she was saying that she wished she could raise a grievance against her entire department, that it wasn't personal. It was about a more general kind of failing. So I feel like I've spoken for a long time there. I hope that was useful. I do have a kind of case study that I can go through some of the details of it if you like, but if you feel that's a decent flavour of the challenges that employees and employers are facing, I can leave it there.
I mean, one of the key takeaways for me is that you can de-risk processes, and it's really important to have really robust policy in place from an organizational perspective, but also to really center and empower, the disabled person in the conversation. So they're leading the plan, they're practicing like as much agency and choice and control over what happens next. And they're, encouraged to have conversations about what they need and when their needs change, to ensure that they're getting, the support they require, right? Maddie, can I ask you a little bit about, the importance of that piece around empowering the disabled person to, lead the charge and make decisions for themselves and giving them access to information or services like AA, which Jim, I'm going to ask you to talk about in a minute. Can you talk me through sort of why that's really important?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing, is that you have often when you have somebody that's looking for accommodations and lots of people are having lots of discussions behind closed doors and there's lots going on in an organisation, it suddenly becomes not very centric to the person at the middle of it. And lots of people forget about their opinion and their perspective and their experience, even though they're actually trying to support them. And it constantly comes back to this very, unfortunately, natural human response to centre ourselves into everything that we do and assume that what we know is what everybody else's experience is. And it's a really dangerous mindset. It happens all the time. Nobody's going to think you're terrible for living like that, because we've all done it at some point where we've assumed that we know what everyone else's experience is like. What happens if we go forward as an employer and say, okay, well, this person has X disability, we'll just sort everything out, we won't need to bother asking them about it. I don't want to have an uncomfortable discussion asking them about it. I don't want to have to sort of deal with the fallout of what happens if I say the wrong thing. Inevitably, it actually is really counterintuitive, and you end up saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, and the person that you're trying to help really suffers as a result. The best thing that companies can do when they are onboarding somebody who has a disability, and actually I'd say onboarding anyone, is having a conversation with people. So you have this, you have people with diagnosed disabilities, people on the waiting list to diagnose disabilities, people that don't know they have disabilities, and then people without disabilities. If you go into every single recruitment, every single hire, every single meeting, assuming that you don't know what the other person is experiencing, and asking questions and exploring what they need and what support looks like for them, it's going to benefit every single member of the organisation. Everybody is going to have a much better time working. And what this boils down to is ensuring that you have a culture of communication and empowering and training managers to have what feels like really terrifying conversations. Managers need to feel empowered and trained to walk into a room with somebody that they know is disabled and say, I understand that you have a disability with XYZ. I'd like to talk about what we can do to support you.
Yeah,
and
sure.
saying that can feel very daunting, but actually it's the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think there's services available to facilitate those conversations. Jim, do you want to talk me through access to work and also our new service, AA? Oop, have we lost Jim? Jim, you're on mute, mate.
Sorry. And there's, I think there's an issue with the chat. Someone's saying in the Q&A that I can type into the chat, but I'm not sure attendees can if they want to. I don't know if you can look at that.
Allow me to try and sort that out.
Sure. So, yeah, access to work is the UK government programme that has existed since the 90s, which claims to essentially, if you're an employer, it helps you figure out what your employee needs in terms of adjustments to do their job. So the thing that I was talking about before. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about in a second is a kind of similar service that we're offering through Be Radical, an assessment service that takes you to that point. I was raised never to criticise a competitor. I don't think it's a good look. I think it's a bit of a waste of time. But and here it might sound like when I'm going to talk about access to work now, that's what I'm doing. It absolutely isn't. I have a professional obligation to be totally honest and open about just how bad a service they are, in large part because if we go around saying that they're providing good service, we are setting up service users to fail, and it causes people a hell of a lot of stress. The Access to Work service, I worked for them as an assessor for a number of years. I think they've been defunded recently. I cannot, in clear conscience, recommend it at all. The issues with it, it will take them a very long time to get to you. It's the actual report you will get is very likely to be inaccurate. I would say that I've worked with hundreds of people over the last few years, just providing training for people with visual impairments. Every single one of those people, after a while, I had to effectively reassess at the start of their training because I was finding about a third to a half had often quite serious inaccuracies in the report. As a side point, I worked with a journalist to raise an FOI request with Access to Work, and they came back and said they audit all their reports and 97% of them are found to be okay. So if anyone's thinking of kind of campaigning to fix access to work, I really do not think that's a good way to allocate your time and energies. But yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. What it actually does is another thing altogether.
And in terms of, so, you know, in terms of things like waiting for assessments and reports and things like this, can you just draw a comparison between the two offers so that people appreciate
sure. So
more investing, and not necessarily in Be Radical service, but there are lots of other private providers out there on the market.
Totally. So in order to figure out what your disabled employee needs in terms of the tools they're using to do their job, you'll provide them with what's called a workplace needs assessment. That's a standard process that has been around for a long time, and reasonably effective in its kind of standard form. They'll meet with somebody, an assessor, who will get an understanding of the job they're doing and the barriers and the issues they're facing at work. Based on that understanding, they'll make an initial set of recommendations for adjustments that can be made. So going back to the example I've used before, someone has a visual impairment, they might be recommended a larger screen, they might be recommended different lighting, they might be recommended software to make stuff bigger on the screen. That is a service that is available across from multiple providers, including Access to Work. What we do differently at Be Radical, first of all, we can turn things around much more quickly. We aim to get a report back within 10 days from the date of assessment, and the date of assessment we can usually bring forward to suit. Comparing to Access to Work, where the last thing I heard was it was over 6 months, the delay now, and then the assessment doesn't actually happen. They're just, people are just being put in touch with someone who's going through some questions on a bit of paper. So the end result is just poor. Again, sorry, going back to the Martin Bromley stuff, this isn't about blame for me. This is about analysing the process and just pointing out where stuff's going wrong. So yeah, that's part of what we do different. We're quicker and we're more accurate. The thing that Be Radical does that no other organisation does, as far as I'm aware, is once the report is written, that is not the end of the service we offer. Initially, there is a meeting that we'll hold with the people in your organisation who need to actually go through this report, make sure it's understood, and make sure they know what they need to do to get everything implemented. Very often, the actual steps are relatively straightforward, but it can be really quite staggering without a meeting like that. It just takes an hour to coordinate everything, how long things can drag out for. And then again, from the employer's point of view, beyond duty of care considerations, which are obviously there, you've got people who are running at 50-40% efficiency, not to get too kind of Taylorist time and motion on it. And as an employer, you're losing money every day as well. So that's really the big difference. First of all, it's quicker and it's more accurate, certainly than Access to Work. While there are other really good providers out there who will do your workplace needs assessment, the aftercare, if you like, that we provide that then makes sure that that assessment process is properly integrated with your organisation with the aim of actually getting the results that people need. That's the bit that Be Radical does that doesn't happen elsewhere.
Thanks, Jim. Cheers. And Eve, I'm really interested to understand what your experience was like with the government service. Good, bad, ugly? Talk to me about it. Oh, darling, you're on mute, babe. Oh. Someone always does that. Someone always does that. No worries.
So yeah, sorry, as I was saying, good, bad and ugly, to be honest. So I only just realised that Access to Work is a government funded tool to set up and provide people with their needs, to be honest, and assessments that they do, and funding for the equipment and support a disabled person or someone with a condition might need to do their job. I also did a training course with my previous employer that was about specific learning difficulties as well, and that I think my previous employer should have thought about this, and all managers and everyone pretty much should be aware of it, and that it is there, and like you do need it to do your job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. So there's the piece around like providing accommodations or adjustments for the individual with the disability. But I think what you're talking about is a bigger piece of work to ensure that the systems, the structures, the cultures within organizations and teams are set up so they're really welcoming, inclusive, make people feel like they belong, right?
Yeah, it's all about equality, diversion and inclusion, because in my previous employees would just, exclude me from everything, and that made me feel quite alone and lonely and not supported in the workplace environment. And like whenever I go into the office, like I would be quiet or tucked in a corner. If that makes sense, I was putting myself away from other people because I thought they couldn't support me and stuff.
So I see lots of love heart emojis coming up, Eve. So I think you're in a place full of love right now. Kath, I see you nodding your head. Have you got some words to say to Eve?
Yeah, because I think what Eve's saying is really important, that actually she's excluding herself rather than a company including her. And I think that's as prevalent as inclusion is, because it might not be that you're overly including someone, but you're not doing the bare minimum to include them, so they then exclude themselves even more. So it gets to a point where there's this like, where are you going to come to a point where there's trust from that employee? If Eve was the employee that we were talking about in this situation, I also think when we've talked about earlier, I heard Jen talking about grievances and things like that. I think there's the education around policies. Policies are in businesses more than most, basically to cover you for the law. They're not there to be run by as a rule. There is a code of conduct and there isn't a code of ethics that a company runs by as a rule in terms of their values and their ethics. Policies are generally there because it's something that you have to have as a legal position. If you ran by policies purely, then you would be the most static business that did not show empathy. You would be someone who was just purely ticking boxes. If you changed your code of conduct and your code of ethics to show that you are about inclusion, and inclusion means putting on, I don't know, having somebody like Eve, for example, doing a talk in front of everybody and saying, this is how I feel included in a business, and allowing perhaps, we used to have a power day where we'd have people come in from different cultures and different abilities and talk to the whole business, not just the manager, not just the stakeholders, the whole business, about how empowering and how brilliant different people would be to come into the business. If you start at the policies point and you just stick with the policies point, then you might as well just run by the rule of the law, which then you're going down a tribunal point of view, and then you're getting really to the point of where what can we do as a business to save ourselves from not having any litigation. If you go down a code of conduct and an ethics route, then ethics is really your values and where you come as a true person. And I think what Eve said has been really valuable in terms of you excluded yourself more, you pulled yourself back more because you weren't getting even the bare minimum. and policies won't talk about the bare minimum. Policies will talk about the law. So Eve, you've given me a lot of information today that I've found really valuable myself.
Yeah, so there's a piece around having, you know, policies and processes, right, but also there's work to be done in terms of creating cultures of inclusion and ensuring that as an employer, you're empowering the people that work in your business to understand the challenges that disabled folk experience, really empathize with those.
Yeah, and also the brilliance they can bring.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. No worries. Thank you. So in terms of like the expectations of, you know, disabled people, I know you can't talk on behalf of all disabled people, Jazz and Maddie, but am I right in thinking that, you know, if the intention of a business is pure, their motivations have you at the sort of the center, they're acting in your best interests. When they get it wrong, is that so much of an issue?
So I think, I don't think getting it wrong is an issue. People make mistakes all the time, like all the time. As long as you're open to making those mistakes, and as long as you understand that those mistakes are going to happen, it's kind of unavoidable, then actually the 9 times, and again, exactly as you said, I can't speak for all disabled people, but in my experience, 99.9% of people are incredibly understanding that you're not going to understand every facet of a disability, because also not only is a kind of disability vary from person to person, but also their experience of it and what other things they're facing varies from person to person. And so people are going to make mistakes, and I'm pretty sure most of us know that. But it's going back to that sort of intention and how pure it is, because actually, and again, this goes back to this culture conversation of how much are you assessing where your intention actually is, because that can be very quickly revealed by your reaction to being corrected by somebody who's got the disability. I have lost count of the amount of times that I have had to say to somebody, oh, can we do this differently because that's how it benefits me? And they've said, well, no, actually it doesn't. And I think, I'm pretty sure it does actually. But that's sort of a huge veil lifting of, actually, you're not doing this for me, you're doing this to avoid a tribunal, for example. And it's the quickest, one of the quickest ways to create a problem for yourself as an organization. And sort of this links back to what Kath was saying, is to go straight for, like, we're going to follow the law, we're going to have it, we're going to follow the policy by the book. You've got to, if your intention is good, you'll be focused on that person that you're trying to support and having those conversations and flexing to them and be willing to work with them.
Yeah. Jazz, got anything to add, mate? I think you probably do, in terms of you know, the importance of feeling empowered and enabled as an individual within a workplace, disabled or not.
Absolutely. I mean, firstly, course correcting is really important when you're making mistakes. It's the direction you want to go into. You know, I've, in my journey in life, made some huge mistakes. One mistake that led me to prison. But it was in that space of, or in that sort of arena of that mistake, that I actually learned so much about me and where I wanted to go. And it was in that depth of that mistake that I actually started to see light and direction on where I wanted to become. And employers can use that sort of same mindset. If your intentions are pure and you know which direction you want to intend to go to. Firstly, human error always plays a part. We're dealing with humans, so we're not all going to get it right first time. But it's about picking up from that debris of the mistakes, those you know, there's rubies in that rubble of that sort of mistake. But also, it's complex. You know, talking about disability, it's not a one check, green check. You know, there's lots of elements that come into place. But also look at companies. You know, different organizations have different resources. You know, who's going to be leading the sort of program? You know, have they been trained themselves? Do they have the sort of skill sets, toolbox to move forward? And then, you know, as I said, we're dealing with humans, so it's always unpredictable. But for me, the key point is, don't aim for perfection. Try and aim just below impossible. That's your target. You normally land in a good place.
Thanks, Jazz. Cheers, mate. So, I mean, that's a really good segue back to you, Jim. I guess, why does it make sense for organisations to enlist the help of experts in all things reasonable adjustments and disability to ensure that people really start well in the workplace and, when their needs change, are accommodated in a really agile, human-centric, proactive manner?
The reason why you need expertise is this is specialist work, and I cannot stress that strongly enough. It's not possible for an organisation, pretty much any organisation internally, to figure out what somebody needs in order to do their job if they have a disability, the adjustments that they need. Now, one thing that can happen is either you get kind of guesswork within the organisation where people, through probably they're well-intentioned, kind of improvising solutions, which just doesn't work. The other thing that can happen is, and I think this is kind of a misinterpretation of what lived experience means and how we're all trying to kind of bring that into our organisations and focus on that. Somebody's lived experience of a disability very likely won't necessarily include experience of the best solutions that are out there. You may be fortunate, you may employ someone who has had a visual impairment for a long time. That visual impairment is stable. They know the software that they've used for the last 10 years to do their job. You get that software, that can work. But again, if they've not actually checked in with the broader kind of field of what's available for 10 years, there might be better solutions. So again, you can't necessarily rely on the expertise of the person you're trying to support, because that's asking too much of them, really. So the solution then is to bring the expertise in. The benefits are kind of multiform, but we can look at this maybe in two different ways. First of all, and this is from the employer's point of view, because it's the employer that kind of makes the decision here, I think, as to what happens. You're being decent people. You are supporting someone who needs support to do their job, who may not be getting that support in other areas of their life or from other employers. You're making the world a better place. And quite often we don't have too many opportunities in our day-to-day lives to do that. And this is a concrete way. If you get this right, you are making things objectively better for that person's life, and they will really appreciate it. On the other side of it, if you are running a business, if your bottom line isn't right, in the long run, you may end up not running a business because it won't exist. At that point, however well-intentioned you are, you're not going to be able to help anybody. But the thing about getting these reasonable adjustments in place is it helps your bottom line. If you have an employee who needs these adjustments to do their job, in the simplest sense, you're just not getting the productivity and the hours out of that person every day, that you would do. In a bigger sense, that person will know that their levels of resentment might go up. They then just might start phoning it in and not working as hard as they might do, and that can lead to bigger issues within the organisation. So yeah, there are many reasons why you kind of want to get this work, do it right, and get expertise in to do it. But that's the kind of overview there.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess on the point of supporting disabled folk who are already in the organisation and whose needs might change, or perhaps they've acquired a disability. Can these assessments be useful in those circumstances as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Some disabilities are likely to stay more or less the same throughout the course of somebody's life. However, in that sense, if they're using technology to do their job, the technology that's available may change. So you may wish to kind of check in for an assessment kind of further down the line just to get that updated. But if someone acquires a disability while they're doing their job, absolutely. I work with many people who lose their sight while they're still of working age, and then the work can then be done to help to give that employee the stuff that maybe they didn't need 6 months ago, but they absolutely need now in order to do their jobs.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much, mate. So I'd like for our audience to walk away from the session with some really tangible actions or solutions that they might go and prototype in their business. I'd like for them to feel empowered to have conversations about disability, and maybe words of advice in terms of how to approach those. Panelists, can you give me one or two things that you want either hiring managers to understand, or CEOs of big businesses to understand, tools, things like this that our delegates can take away, please? And I'm going to start with Jazz. What's your advice?
I think it goes back to something that Maddie said earlier on about that first step of making everything inclusive. But equally, it's not just about having the framework. It's about empowering the humans within that framework to get the best out of the framework. Because we've all sat in meetings where everyone's talking about DEI. I'd like to sort of quote Banksy, if I may. He says that art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Well, DEI is the same. People like Stevie Wonder, Frida Kahlo, Helen Keller, the author, Ian Thorpe, the swimmer, all superhumans in their field. We would have missed out on all that talent. So for my process is look at your inner workings, look at the people around you, look at your demographics of your team, your talent. What does it look like? Because that tells you where you are on the sort of scale of whether you're at the top of the sort of tree or the pyramid, or you're at the base. Because if you've got people with disabilities in your leadership team, you must be doing something right. If you haven't got anybody anywhere near the top or even in the building, there's a lot of work to do. So do that inner MRI, that X-ray, and then come and speak to us.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jazz. Eve, I see you nodding your head. Talk to me, sister.
I agree everything that Jazz said. Well done. I would just like to say that thank you to everyone for attending, and my advice would be just be nice and kind to employers, and then you'll get what they need from you, if that makes sense. So yeah, just be kind, and then the world's a good place.
Yeah, beautiful insights. Thank you very much, Eve. Couldn't agree more, mate. You're a very wise person. Kath, talk to me. What can employers do? What can hiring managers do?
Set themselves up for success before looking to employ people with disabilities. Perhaps if you've got people with disabilities in your business who are now open to disclose them, then take the advice from experts or people that can actually help you to do it properly. If you are looking to employ people with disabilities, then make sure you're set up for success in the first place. If you're doing things rashly, or you're doing things quickly, or shooting from the hip, then it's not going to help you. So my advice would be to set yourselves up for success as an employer before setting others up for success as well.
Yeah, a flippant approach doesn't really do anyone any favors. And I think it's really important to be intentional. Couldn't agree more. Maddie, what are your key takeaways? What can people go and do?
So I think Eve, Jazz and Kath have said some pretty exceptional points there, which is quite hard to follow on. So I'm going to go, instead of going sort of jumping off from what they've said, I'm going to go to a point that I think often gets forgotten when we're talking about inclusion and accommodating people with disabilities. There has to be an overwhelming culture of wellness, an overwhelming culture of having a work-life balance. When you have, and I say this a lot, and if you have seen me before, I probably have said this, but often when people are not accommodating of others, when they're not empathetic, when they are not supporting other people, it's because they are struggling hugely themselves. And so actually one of the best things that companies can do is look at the well-being of all of the existing employees, as well as the person that's coming in and joining. There aren't many people that are hostile and unpleasant to work with, that are really happy, well people in their personal life. And that's something that we have to really be aware of. You are far more likely to have the bandwidth and the capacity to handle very emotionally charged meetings. Do ask the scary questions if you're feeling very confident and comfortable in your role and your sort of health and well-being as well. So I think during COVID, there was this great sort of big conversations about, are we looking after our people? They're stuck at home. We're going to talk, we're going to engage, we're going to have communications, we're going to be very open. And now people are coming back to the office. It's like companies are going, oh, it's a bit on our hub, on the intranet, and nobody really reads it anymore. That needs to be addressed. Absolutely needs to be addressed. There needs to be support. If you've got well-being packages that come from other companies, if you've got therapy included in for employer, my brain's broken, but yeah, if you have it, it needs to be visible. People need to be aware of what you are offering, and there needs to be big conversations about wellness as a whole.
Yeah, certainly. So like that flippant approach to rest, and
yes.
really think about what meaningful action might look like, that's super impactful and relevant to the people that you claim to support and invest in. Jazz, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I just want to add, to come to me, is calling the experts. Yeah, if you want to have this true conversation, calling the experts. You wouldn't get a doctor to fix your car, you wouldn't get a plumber to do your electricity. Yeah, so why do we think that, you know, people that, you know, are working in HR or in talent teams, they have the capacity to take on this work? Yeah, don't be scared to outsource it and reel in the experts.
Beautiful. And James, your key takeaways?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just to reiterate what Jazz said there, I think that if you're asking line managers, HR people to do this work, and they are not skilled in it, which in almost all cases they won't be, that's not a failing on their part, that's not their specialism. Not only do you end up not providing the service you need to provide to your disabled employee, you end up asking a lot of all these people in your organization and not providing them with the support they need in order to do that. And I think that's a really important point, just the way that this stuff can really have a lot of knock-on effect. So my takeaways, I have three things here that are already focused around something I raised before, which is that this problem can exist in organizations. It can have this ripple effect that goes way beyond the employee that you're looking to support. And one of the worst things about it is you may not even be able to tell you have a problem, and it can just sit and fester and rot, and no one will bring it to your attention if you're a business owner or a decision maker here. So here's how you can figure out what's going on in your own organization. Line managers, in general, when someone has a workplace needs assessment, the output of that is a report that will tell the organization what they need to do to support that individual. In almost all cases, that report is delivered to the employee who needs to support their line manager. The line manager is then tasked with implementing that report. Pick a few line managers in your organization, pick people that have line management responsibilities, speak to your friends who do this day to day, ask them what support they have in order to implement a workplace needs assessment report for someone they're line managing who has a disability. It's a very simple question. Make it clear to them that they're not going to get in trouble if they don't know. And just ask them, what would you do if this report landed on your desk? The other thing as well is really a pretty dry kind of KPI. If you employed someone that had a disability, what's the amount of time between them disclosing a disability to you and you getting them in front of a workplace needs assessor so they can get their needs understood? And that will just be defined as a number of days. You can figure that out within your own organization. How long is that taking you at the moment? The next part then is, once you've had the workplace needs assessment, what's the number of days between that and not having the report delivered, because that's easy to control. What's the number of days between workplace needs assessment and the recommendations have been implemented correctly? And what's the test on the correctness? Usually that's about going back to the person that's been assessed and say, hey, those barriers we talked about before, are they still there for you? are you doing that? And what's the number of days there? So those are the three things. They're very kind of dry, but I think to that end, it can help you get a handle on what's going on in your organization. If you get answers back that are surprising to you, that are confusing, please come and talk to us. Like, I'm available, I'm happy to kind of chat to you, and we can take things from there and try and help you fix it, hopefully.
Thanks very much, mate. I think I've gone around the panel. Have I gone around the panel? Yeah, beautiful. So in terms of the questions we've got in the chat, there aren't that many actually. So I take that to mean that we've covered off most of the areas of information that we intended to and that people need. One question was, when businesses say they're committed to creating a diverse workforce, disability is more often than not at the bottom of the list. How can we come together to push disability up the agenda and close the employment gap? Who wants to take that question? Can I throw to maybe Catherine and Maddie?
So it depends what kind of business you work for. So I worked for a French business, and a French business has to employ 10% of disabled people in France. So they have a legal obligation to employ 10% of their employees as disabled people. So they then push that out across their other countries for disability to be high on the agenda. It doesn't mean they do it necessarily well. I'm not saying that they didn't, but it doesn't mean that it's a bit of a light touch. I think the only thing about driving it forward is educating. So you can put it on the agenda yourself. If you're an employee, you are still able to, when you're sitting down and doing your objectives, or when you're sitting down and doing your personal objectives or your company objectives, you can say, this is something that's really important to me. You can put forums together. It doesn't have to come from the top. You can start to manage, is my opinion, when it comes to it.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not going to argue with anything Cass said, because that's all great. Absolutely love all of that. I think in addition to all of those things, I think there's this huge thing about what gets spoken about, what gets spoken about. And so, I mean, you see it whenever something becomes like a trending topic to do with employment, it ends up being spoken about a lot. And so if you can replicate that inside your organization, so let's say it could be something as simple as, if you have an internal sort of company-wide chat, you can start to share articles about disability accommodations, you can start to share articles about empathetic leadership, and you can start to introduce the fact that this is going to be something we're going to talk about. And then you can also bring in people who have lived experience, people that are experts in the field. I mean, all of us here, this is all stuff that we talk about. We talk about talking to companies about our experiences and talking to companies about what they can do. You can bring people in to raise awareness. You could create employee resource groups. So if you have employee resource groups for people, and what that means is it's basically you create an in-company community where you can get lots of resources, they can talk and they can talk amongst themselves as well. So it can be a really free space where people can share their experiences in the company as well. And you can have in that employee resource group, you don't have to just limit it to people who have disabilities. You could have people that are carers, you can have people that have children or loved ones that are disabled. Their disabilities affects pretty much everyone. I actually don't know anyone that isn't friends with, related to somebody with a disability. It is so widespread, and yet nobody talks about it. And so your biggest sort of movement forward as an organisation to drive inclusion and diversity is to be unafraid to have that conversation and start exposing people to the word disability, and also simultaneously exposing people to the word empathy. And you will start to quite naturally have these conversations.
Jazz, you've got your hand up, mate.
Something to add to what Catherine and Maddie have eloquently put together is first step is equity. Yeah, if you want to get anywhere in this space, you've got to look at equity. You know, what are the barriers? How can you not make, what's stopping us making it a level playing field? But equally, partner with, disabled organizations, go out there. There's lots of charities, lots of organizations where you can connect with people, what Maddie said about, having that sharing, that sort of almost fireside chat, that cup of tea, so that you can start breaking down your preconceptions, your biases, whether hidden or at the forefront. But start looking at organizations around you that you can tap into, because there's lots out there.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess from a recruitment perspective, think about that whole end-to-end process and how the tools you use are designed or not designed to ensure that disabled folk can access them. So I'll give you an example. A career site that doesn't have an accessibility plugin in it may not be accessible to a person who is, say, dyslexic and requires the contrast of colors to be different than what's on the site. It could be that the person landing on the career site uses a screen reader, but actually the tabs on the site aren't tagged, in which case they're not readable by the screen reader. So thinking about, okay, you've got the disabled community and many, many groups and individuals within that community. What is it that is a barrier or a blocker to those individuals and those groups, and how can we remove them? There's some amazing technology out there. We're going to hear from Ross, the CEO of Recite Me, tomorrow, and he'll talk to all of that. I think also, there's resources within organizations. Ask the question, how can we make this more accessible? What was your experience in our process? Collect that data and use it. Eve, one tip. Can I ask for one tip for the hiring managers in the room to make people with disabilities feel, included in organizations, and also, making their processes more accessible?
Yeah.
So actually, I think two tips, sorry, for me.
So for me, I would just say, just be kind, ask lots and lots of questions, because asking these questions isn't just about asking them, it's helping you, if that makes sense. Like, asking questions help, and you get answers from asking lots of questions, and the support you need, and is just, yeah, it's just great.
Beautiful, thank you very much. And I've got Jamie Shields in the chat. So Jamie is an expert in all things accessibility from a blind and VI perspective. So please do reach out to him and use his services. More than happy to endorse Jamie and everything that he does. In terms of the questions, I think we've run out in the, oh no, actually we've got one more. Jim, can you talk to me about funding, mate? So access to work is free. Our solution isn't.
Yep.
Who should be using what service and why?
Access to work is not free. You will get an assessment, let's say 6 months down the line. I'm being kind of generous there. I need to reframe this as well to say this is not me criticizing a competitor in any way. This is just me being open about what access to work is like, to redress some misunderstandings so that service users are not disappointed and angry when they use that service, because that's what I see kind of every day of my working life, really. So the service isn't free. You've got 6 months before you can actually get somebody assessed. Now, not suggesting you do a full kind of time and motion study to say, okay, if that person doesn't have these tools for that 6 month period, they're losing that amount of productivity. But 5 minutes on the back of an envelope, you can work out that there is a number there that you are spending. Yes, there is an amount of funding that will come from access to work, potentially. Most access to work grants, if we're not talking about kind of administrative support and paying for staffing costs and taxis, which is a separate thing, is relatively small. And I think that if you do that back of an envelope calculation, you'll find out that paying for a private assessment, getting an accurate service, getting a service where you can get someone on the phone to say, hey, I'm not sure about this thing, or this hasn't quite worked for us, what do we do next, is worth the money. Now, when I say it's worth the money, you'll end up spending less money. So it is cheaper in a real kind of sense there. Just a note on that, one thing that Access to Work do fund is support workers and taxis if you need that to get into work. There is nothing stopping you starting the Access to Work process when you know that the employee needs support, also contacting us or some other kind of private assessment company, so you know that that funding is coming down the line. Now, I have clients at the moment who are saying, well, okay, we're going to go out and fund all of the core software that somebody needs. In the long term, we're going to use Access to Work to provide the administrative support that they need, because that's an ongoing cost. But we're going to look at providing that privately for the interim period. And once you're in the queue, then everything is as good as it can be.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to take this opportunity to thank all of our delegates for giving up their time and committing to learning today and being better allies to disabled people and disabled communities. I think that, you know, if you can take anything away from this session, it is that there is a wealth of resources available, both probably in your organisation, but externally to that. And you have a choice to go and practice curiosity and empathy, to understand really what the challenges are, where the barriers and blockers are, and how your organisation might provide solutions to those in order to really level the playing field for disabled people. Or you cannot, and that's completely your choice. When you don't do it, you miss out on the most rich, most amazing talent pool. There are 14 million people with disabilities in the UK. Many of them want to work and are just not enabled to, because your processes, your policies, your people are providing significant barriers that they just don't have the capacity to overcome without support. So please go back and have these conversations with your workforce, with your colleagues. Ask the challenging conversations. You know, why aren't we recruiting from the disabled talent community? What can we do to reduce the barriers? What are we so scared of? You know, and how can we address that in terms of our culture and our people? How can we enable people with disabilities to have voices? These are the things that you can start talking about and taking action to resolve. So please, please, please go and be brave change makers, unapologetically radical and bold. In terms of our panelists, I appreciate you all. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. A particular shout out to Eve, because she's not very experienced in all of this and she did such a beautiful job. I'm really, really proud of you, mate, and I hope you're proud of you. And in terms of sort of moving forward, we invite you to join us for the next Radical Talks, which will take place at the same time tomorrow. And that's going to unpack all things making your processes accessible and welcoming to disabled people through a recruitment lens. We did run a neurodivergence session on Monday called Neurodivergence, My Employer and Me. If you'd like a copy of that, please drop your email or name in the chat and I will send that over to you so you can play that back. And if you've got any inquiries for the panelists or you'd like to work with us, I will shortly send over a wrap-up email with links to our respective LinkedIns and ways of contacting us and exploring partnerships. So thank you very much. Happy National Inclusion Week, everyone, and look after yourselves and be kind to each other. See ya.